This is part one of a seminar I gave at the 2014 Western Washington Sportsman Show in Puyallup, Washington. And we're going to be talking about drift fishing artificial eggs. Drift fishing is one of my go-to methods for fishing for steelhead. Using artificial eggs for steelhead can be very effective for steelhead in all types of water. Here in part one, we'll cover getting set up and choosing the right equipment.
So today we're going to talk about drift fishing artificial eggs. How many of you guys drift fish or free drift eggs now? Okay, almost 50%. That's not too bad. So how many of you guys ever run out of eggs? Yep, I do. I've come close. You know, when you run out of eggs, or maybe your eggs aren't working, it's time to change it up. It's time to try something else. When you cure your eggs, what are you doing to those eggs? What are you putting in there? Scent, right? Pheromones. You know, how many of you guys use like a one-shot cure, like a Potsky's cure? Yeah, I do. Why? Because I'm curing 15, 20 pounds of eggs a day, and I don't have time to go through the 2 or 3 day process, right? So I need those eggs cured, put them on, put all my stuff up, clean up, get up, do it all over again the next day. So what if that's not working? You know, and if you're like I am, you use the same cure for everything, then you've got the same krill base or the same shrimp base that's hitting there. Steelhead are funny, right? It's not like catching salmon. You have to work at it. You have to work in keeping your gear in the right place. You have to work at getting them to hit something that you're offering. And sometimes when you're out there and you've been throwing the same thing and you're not getting anything and it's slow, at what point do you ask yourself, is it time to change? Right? And you do need to change, but you need to be flexible so you can make that change. So we're going to talk about artificial eggs. I'm not the only guide that has been using these artificial eggs for years, and they work. Because one of the things that you can do with artificial eggs, outside of changing color, is you can now change your scent. So if maybe one scent base isn't working, you can try something else. All right? So before we get into all of the nuts and bolts, and I've got some stuff that we'll pass around so that you guys can feel it, you can look at it, you can touch it, is we have to talk about equipment. Drift fishing requires certain types of equipment. You cannot simply grab your 5.5-foot trout rod that you fish on the lake and head out to the river and start drift fishing. You can try. I did it. Can you catch fish? Yes. But at the end of the day, you're worn out, right? So you need equipment that's going to work. I fish the St. Croix Avid Series rods. You want a 9.5-foot rod. 9.5-foot rods are really a staple in the Pacific Northwest for drift fishing and free drifting. It's the size rod that when it's balanced properly, you can cast all day long and your elbow doesn't hurt, your forearm doesn't hurt. But the key is you need to balance it properly. The rods that I use handle 4 to 8 pound test line. Now we fudge with that a little. Yes, it says 4 to 8 pound. I use 10 pound. I know a lot of guides that fish 12 pound, and you can get away with that. The rod will handle it. Where you start crossing the line is if you start putting too much lead on the rod. Yeah, maybe you can plunk with it, but casting effectively gets a little questionable. So you want to watch that. So once you get your rod, now one thing on rods, guys, you don't need to go out there if you're new to this and spend $375 on a rod. If you want to see what an expensive rod feels like before you buy it, Go book a trip with a guide. You'll learn something and you'll fish the expensive rods. And then you get to find out if you like that rod. But you can't run down to Sportco, say, let me borrow that rod and take it out and go fishing to see if you like it. So if you're new to it, you want to get a 9.5 foot rod. You can get into them for as little as $79. That's pretty inexpensive for a rod. Then you need to get a reel. You need a reel that's going to balance with the rod, okay? Your reel can't be too large because it won't balance, and it can't be too small. Not only will it not balance, but you won't have the line capacity to handle the fish and keep them in the pocket or in the hole, especially if you're a bank angler. How many bank anglers do we have? No boat, just bank. Yep, I like bank fishing. Okay, when you're looking for reels, Daiwa and Shimano kind of set the standard with the 2500 series reels. I don't fish the Daiwa or Shimano, I fish the Pflueger Supremes. But the number on this is like an 835 MX. But the size is the same. So if you're going into a store, you're not getting very good help, and you're trying to gauge, hey, what size reel am I going to put on my brand new 9.5 foot, 4 to 8 weight slow action reel rod, then look at the Daiwa Regal 2500 series, because they're the right size. They're going to give you the line capacity that you need when you get into a botanical obstruction and you snap some line off. You don't have to re-spool right away. You can keep fishing for a while. You can do that a couple times and get away with it, right? So now you've got your rod and reel matched up, you need to get line on it. I fish Iser line. I love their product. I like the line, and it's a simple reason why. It's good to the last inch on the spool. And I like to use all my line. So I use Iser line, XXX copolymer, and yes, I use the high-vis yellow. A lot of people see this high-vis yellow and they're like, I can't believe you're fishing that. If you're fishing from a bank, or if you're fishing from a boat and you've cast your line out there in the river and it's going down, have you ever kind of looked and said, where's my line, right? Because you can't see it. And in our rivers here in the Northwest, that high-vis line just disappears in the water. Now, on my leaders aren't high-vis. My leaders are moss green. And I'll go one better for you. I'm not using fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon's great. And if you're going to tie your own leaders, and you're only going to tie 20 or 30 leaders, knock yourself out. But when you tie 400, like I do, at a time, fluorocarbon tears your hands up, right? And it's expensive. So I use Iser line in the green. Nothing special. You can use Strin. If Strin's your line, use Strin. It's okay. So I use 10-pound test. If you're a bank angler and you don't have a lot of room to chase these steelhead or salmon up and down the bank, you need a heavier test line. If you're a bank angler and you've got 40 yards you can go this way and 40 yards you can go that way, and the other 30 people you're standing next to don't mind moving out of the way, use 10-pound test. You'll have more fun, okay? But if you need to keep that fish close, you need to be able to palm that reel and keep them from running too much. Know when to give, know when to take, know when to reel in that slack. Then you need to be fishing a 12-pound line. I even know some people that'll bump it up to 14-pound. I think it's a little heavy. 12 is generally pretty good. Average steelhead size, Western Washington, you're looking at 8 pounds. We've been getting into the teens up on the Skykomish and Skagit recently. So you'll get bigger fish, and if you're in a boat, you're fine. Because your rod is a dynamic system, the boat's moving, you can chase the fish. But if you're on the bank, you gotta keep that fish close to you so he doesn't break off. Because steelhead, when they bite something, they'll run into these rocks, they'll run into trees, they'll do everything they can to get that lure out of their mouth. They almost remind me of small and largemouth bass, right? They're predatory in nature when they feed. And when they get something that they don't like, they want it out, okay? So, whatever you decide for leaders or for mainline, 2 pounds lighter on the leader. 2 pounds. So if you're 12 pound, go 10 pound leader. If you're 10 pound mainline, go 8 pound leader. Okay, lighten up just a little bit on your leaders. All right? And then for your hook size, you've got to tie some hooks onto your leaders. I use size 4 Vision tackle. A lot of guys like the Gamakatsus, some like the owners. Whatever hook you like, you choose that hook and you tie that up. But size 4 is great. And size 4 is just fine for the guys on the bank. I've had some guys that attend seminars, they hear the things that I talk about, I see them on the river, and then they show me their hook. And they're using like a 1 or a 2. And I ask a simple question. Did you float that before you're fishing it? What do you mean? Well, the hook, if it's too big, isn't going to work on that size cheater or corky. You gotta see if you have buoyancy. For you guys that are unfamiliar with a cheater or a corky, it's this little guy right here at the end of the hook, above the yarn, that allows the hook and your bait to float. You need buoyancy. Because guys, these steelhead, they're down there on the bottom. I like to fish them about 12 inches off the bottom, right? They're holding, you're not catching them, pretty rarely are you catching them while they're moving upriver, right? Because they're going to the next spot to hold. They're down there and they're holding and they're on the bottom, their bellies are near the bottom. So I want my stuff somewhere between 12 to 18 inches off the bottom. If you're using a size 10 cheater on like a number 1 or number 2 Gamakatsu, that hook weighs more. And that hook's going to make that drop lower and you're not going to be catching fish. You might snag a couple, but you're not going to be catching them. Always test your stuff in the bathtub or a 5-gallon bucket of water. Okay, it's safe. Now, you get your hooks tied on there. You guys, if you're bank fishing, check your regulations. There are places, many places, in fact, I think all of the state of Washington, if you're bank fishing, you can only use a single hook. Okay, in a boat, you can use double hook setups. I did not tie any double hook setups in here today just so I could show I do fish singles. You can fish singles. It's fine. But check your regs so you don't get in trouble, okay? All right, so now we got our rod, we got our reel, we have our main line, we have our leaders. We've tied the right size hook on. We've chosen the right size cheaters or corkies. Size 10 for a number 4 hook works well. Even in the Gamakatsus, they're a little heavier, a little stiffer hook, okay? Works just fine. You have lead. You only use enough lead to slightly tick across the bottom of the river, about every 6 to 8 feet. If your lead is on the bottom and it's constantly boom, 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 it's too much lead. It's telling you, please help me, get me off, put something else on, okay? It's too much. And I'll give you an example. Just last week, fishing on the sky, that's what I was using. I use 3/16 solid lead. I'm very picky. I buy my lead from one place and one place only. I buy 25 pounds at a time. I have a machine that I push lead through and I go, and it cuts every piece of my lead the same size. So if I'm going to use 1-inch lead, it doesn't matter what I grab, every piece is exactly 1 inch. I start cutting my lead at 3/4 inch and I work my way up all the way to 2. There's some water you're gonna fish, you're gonna need 2 inches of lead. 3/16 solid, that's what I use. You can use slinkies. You can use solid core and you can put it in the surgical tubing if you want. You could use the hollow core. That's your personal preference. I like this. And the reason I get my lead from the same place and I use a machine is because if this lead hooks up on something, the hole that it gives me rips the lead off and I don't lose my gear. Okay?
Well, that wraps it up for part 1. Make sure you move on to part 2, where I talk about leader length and choosing artificial eggs for drift fishing.